Chapter 9. The old lady removed her brass-rimmed spectacles and put aside her knitting. "Ah, there you are, pet," she said. "I've been expecting you this last day or two." Abigail sat down beside Mrs. Taliska's chair and leant her head on her knee. The touch of the work-hardened hand on her hair was dear and familiar to her. "You feel that something very frail and precious, maybe like a china cup, has been chipped and cracked. Is that so, Abby?" Abigail thought about that. "No," she said at last. "It hasn't been spoiled or changed. I just didn't want her, Beatie, or anyone, to look at it because it was private." The hand went on stroking. "I suppose I'm too young to know anything about falling in love," said Abigail humbly. She knew she could never have spoken like this to her mother. She would have died in torment rather than say such a thing to any of the girls at school. It seemed to her now that they were just a bold-mouthed, sniggering rabble of children, too old to be innocent, too young to be fastidious. "But I suppose that's not fair either," she thought. "How do I know what they feel in their hearts? They talk like that because other kids think they're freaks if they don't." "It wouldn't be for me to say that you're too young to know true love, Abby," said Granny tranquilly, "for I was wed at 15 myself." "And you've not forgotten what it's like?" asked Abigail, amazed. "Look into my eyes," said Granny. She took Abigail's chin in her hand and made the girl look steadfastly at her. The cloudy blue of the old woman's eyes cleared, widened, became a sky with clouds running over it like lizards over a wall, a sea far below, leaping, boiling, a marvellous blue-green, like a mallard drake's neckband. She heard Granny's voice, far, far away, hardly distinguishable from the squealing of the birds, white and dark birds whirling into and out from precipices that stood like walls and battlements. Guillemots, she sea-shag and turns," said Granny. "Look at yourself, lass." Abigail was no longer herself. She was someone else. A dark brown braid streaked with blonde fell over her left shoulder almost to her waist. Her hands were red and chapped. She wore a coarse ankle-length black skirt and a white apron. The very eyes through which she looked were different, clearer, further-seeing, and she instinctively knew, desperate and wild. "My own Ian," said Granny, "when I was 18, nearly widowed." Down that giddy steep Abigail gazed, her whole body thirsting to thrust itself out on that wild wind that whirled the birds down to the sea and up again in tatters and ribbons and shoals of small living bodies, to fall like a stone amongst the black shining reefs and the ever-tossing serpentine arms of the kelp. I can't," cried Abigail, and her voice was different, her words in a dialect she did not know yet understood. There are the bairnies, there are my old parents and yours, Bartle. I cannot come and leave them without a care. I must live on, in spite of pain." "I can't bear it," whispered Abigail. "I can't bear it." In a second she was back in the parlour. Mrs. Talisker, her eyes very bright, was gripping her hands. "Are you all right, Granny?" panted Abigail. The intensity of her feeling had not left her. She felt she had been through a lifetime of happiness and woe. "Yes," said the old woman. She seems revivified, her bent back straightened, her faded eyes glistening with triumph and excitement. "Aye, that was a good flash, like a sky full of lightning, like the old days when past and future were spread out before me like a field of flowers." "Was I you?" breathed Abigail. "Yes, I was you, and Bartle was your husband. Drowned off the Noop like his son Robert. Near 19 he was, like his grandson Judah Bow. Aye, the young can experience true love, and true sorrow, and true selflessness too." "I don't think I could," faltered Abigail. "Be unselfish, I mean." Mrs. Talisker looked at her with something like scorn. "If you love truly, you will also know how to live without the beloved, no matter whether you lose him to death or some other." Abigail felt helpless and anxious. "But I don't think I'm good enough to be like that. Maybe when I'm older." "Age has naught to do with it, Abby," returned Mrs. Talisker. "But," faltered Abby, "already I feel jealous of Dovey." She was ashamed. "When I was shaking Beatie," the old woman laughed heartily. "You shook Beatie? 'Twill do that one a world of good." "Yes," confessed Abigail. "I shook her till her tonsils rattled. But all the time I was wishing it was Dovey. It was horrible, like a kind of black oil smeared over everything. I'm afraid, Granny, that I'll be nasty to Dovey, say something cruel. And I don't want to." "And why, Abby? Because you like poor Dovey so much, and she hasn't done you anything but kindness?" "Yes, that," said Abigail, "but mostly because I don't want to make Judah unhappy, ever, and he would be if anyone hurt Dovey." Mrs. Talisker leant over and kissed Abigail's cheek lightly. "You'll do, my honey." She would say no more, but asked Abigail to fetch the lamp and light it. "And send Beatie to me, hen." Beatie went in glowering and came out snivelling. She joined Abigail at the kitchen table where the girl was scrubbing potatoes in a dish of water. Granny said I was to be civil to you, and I will, but 'tis not for your sake. So if I smile at you, 'tis from the teeth outwards. Abigail sighed. I hope it rains on Sunday, so we can't go cockling, because it will be hell with you glaring at me with steam coming out of your ears. It ain't fair, said Beatie, crimson with wrath and tears. Granny said if I didn't behave sweet and kind to you, she'd give me a look. And if it ain't any better than the one I got 10 minutes ago, I dunna want to live to see it. And she said I wasna to give as much as a hint to Dovey that you're mooning over my brother Judah. If you'd hurt Dovey that way, then you don't love Dovey as you say you do, said Abigail sharply. You just watch your tongue, because I for one am sick of it. Beatie turned to her forlornly. Well, I ken it is sharpened both ends, but your ain't inna much better, Abby, all said and done. What did Granny say to you? Asked Abby, to upset you so. She said, confessed Beatie forlornly, that on Sunday Judah would know for true whom he loves, and oh, Abigail, I'm afeard it might be you. For one moment Abigail's heart filled with bliss. It blazed up and it was gone, she did not know why. All she felt then was a premonitory sadness, not a child's disappointed sadness, but something sterner and more adult. But this was not a thing about which she could speak to Beatie. It was as private as love. She knew now why her mother had been silent all those years about her hurt and loneliness. Well, then, she said composedly to Beatie, at least we know that Sunday will be a fine day and we'll go cockling. Will you promise me, solemn, that you won't let Dovey go get hurt? Pleaded Beatie. Abigail thought about that. I can't promise it any more than Granny can promise it. But I don't want Dovey to get hurt in any way, and that's for true. Beatie considered this. Very well, she said grudgingly, but I'll keep my eye on you. Sharp. Dovey prepared them a picnic basket. Her excitement over the beauty of the day, the pleasures in store for them, the feast of cockles they would have that night and on the morrow, seemed almost as if, lame as she was, she frolicked with honest joy at the thought of someone else's good fortune. Inside her, Abigail felt a bitter humiliation. If Judah thought of her as a child, as Beatie had once said, Dovey thought of her as even more of one. Even if Dovey had guessed her love for Judah, she had no jealousy towards her, but perhaps she didn't know. Gentle and good as she was not as sharp-witted as Beatie or Gibby. Abigail gave Dovey's bride chest a spiteful kick, but that made her feel she was a child after all. Heavy at heart, she went down the crooked stairs and through the shop. Mr. Bow had banked the great open fire, as he always did at night. A downy blanket of grey ash lay over the winking, slow-breathing fire that drowsed in the depths of the immense log at the back of the chimney. Once a month, a log was hauled with chains through a little trapdoor specially built in the side of the house next to the fireplace. Mr. Bow sat on the bench beside the sleeping fire, his hands dangling between his legs. Abigail bade him goodbye, but he did not answer. I'm not gay happy about him, confessed Judah as they went through the cut and over the green. His spells are more frequent, there's no denying, but there's no drink in the house, and he's amenable to Granny. Come now, Beatie, you've a lip like a jug. Cheer up, lass, all will be well. But Beatie was fidgety and capricious, running ahead of them through the empty Sunday streets, short with Abigail, impudent to Judah, sometimes sullen, sometimes curvetting and prancing like an urchin, vanishing down side lanes and bobbing out at them again, until Judah caught her by the tails of her pinafore and said, Will you take hold of yourself, hen? I'm weary already of your jumping about like a nag with a chestnut under its tail. Now quieten down, for once we get in the boat you'll have to turn into a mouse, and you might as well start practicing now. Beatie meekly took his hand. They walked ahead of Abigail towards what she knew was Darling Harbour, but which the Rocks people still called Cockle Cove. Occasionally Beatie turned round and glared at Abigail as though warningly, and when Judah was not looking, Abigail glared back, knowing what Beatie meant to convey to her. Monkey face, thought Abigail, blanky little watchdog. Several ladder-like wooden stairways ran down to the beaches and slipways below Miller's Point. The beaches were littered with the refuse of ships, broken gear, rotted rope, rusty iron things half sunken in the sand and gravel. There was a fearful smell of rotted fish and vegetables from a mountain of muck where the pit-water boats that brought the northern farmers' produce to the markets dumped their unsold cargoes. Children and old women rooted amongst this garbage for anything edible. The little boat rocked in a foot or so of water. The girls took off their shoes and stockings and waded out. Judah was already barefooted. Get in and be smart about it, he ordered. Abigail and Beatie climbed in, and Judah pushed the dory off the sand flat, running alongside till she was well afloat, and then jumping in and taking the oars. With a couple of strong pulls he had the mountain deeper water. Cockle Bay stretched to the south, and beyond their bow were the headlands of the North Shore, bronze-green and forested, with faint chalk smudges of domestic smoke drifting up from what looked to Abigail like isolated settlements. Only North Sydney seemed fully built upon, for it was eerie to see it without the bridge's mighty forefoot coming down upon Wilson's Point. What took Abigail's eye was not the majestic half-wilderness of the North Shore, which she had known as a twin city as tall towered as Sydney, but the harbour itself. The ships, she shouted. Hundreds, thousands of ships. For the harbour was an inhabited place. Barges of rust-brown sails, busy little river ferries with smoke wafting from tall stacks, fishing boats and pleasure boats with finned paddle wheels, 60-milers, colliers, towering masted barkentines with sails tied in neat parcels along what Abigail thought of as their branches. Every type of vessel imaginable, huddled in coves, lying askew on slipways and beaches, skipping before them over the water, rocking gaily or slowly and grandly at a bay or wharf berth. "What did you expect then?" snapped Beatie. "Cows?" Abigail, entranced at the magnificent sight, scarcely heard her, but Judah frowned at his sister. "Whoa now, lass, what's with you? Is that any way to talk to a guest, and our own Abby at that? Mind your manners, I'm telling you." Beatie turned her face away, lip poked out, eyes full of angry tears, which Judah ignored. Abigail rose to her knees, crying, "It's marvellous! I never dreamt it could be like this." "Sit down," ordered Judah, "or you'll have us all in the salt. Look overboard and see yon fellow." Abigail gingerly sat down and looked where he pointed. She saw a large shark, with an eye like a willow leaf, cruising 3 meters below them. A cloud of sprats fled before it, but the green eye was fixed on the boat. Beatie looked at the shark with a shudder and yet a certain satisfaction. "No doubt," reflected Abigail, "she's imagining me falling overboard." "There's the brothers," said Judah, jerking his head towards a sturdy 2-masted brig, very shabby. "She's square-rigged on both masts, handy for the coastal trade." Abigail asked what these hosts of coastal vessels carried. "Coal from Newcastle," said Beatie instantly. "Sadder from the northern rivers, whale oil from the whale station at Eden, and wool from up and down the coasts for the clipper ships to take to England." She looked triumphantly at Abigail. "And what did they carry in your time, then?" "I don't think there are many ships," said Abigail. "Things like wool come in trains." "We've got steam trains," said Beatie proudly. "These would be electric or oil-driven, I think," said Abigail, "and then a lot of goods come overland in huge semi-trailers. That's a kind of horseless carriage," she added hastily. Judah listened politely. "Seems a sad waste of good money when the sea and the wind are free for all," he remarked. Judah's complete lack of interest in the marvels of the future cheered Beatie instantly, and Abigail, no longer irked by the sullen ill temper of her young companion, gave herself up to the joy of the day. They drifted past innumerable coves, some a rich green with mangrove swamps, empty of all but a tall white heron picking about around in the mud, others already claimed by a little shipyard, a spindly jetty, a half-ribbed whale-boat skeleton on the slips. Though Abigail had learnt to know the harbour and its endless bays from her crow's nest at the top of Mitchell, she had long since lost her sense of direction as the dory nosed around the rock inlets, the war mares sometimes bringing a wanderer butterfly, or once a black prince cicada, a tinselly creature that clung to the bow with hooked feet, creaked once or twice, and flicked away towards land. Under cliffs dribbling water, Judah pulled in towards a crescent of beach, dragged up the boat a little way, and jabbed the anchor into the mud. I'm hungry, cried Beatie, hopping out. "No, cockles first, while the tide's low," commanded Judah. He took 3 wooden pails from the dory. "Tuck your skirts up. The dear knows I dunno want you both dripping all over me on the trip home." He showed Abigail how to find the breathing hole and sometimes the track of the cockle and dig for the shellfish with a stick. Beatie stayed close to her brother, and for much of the time Abigail wandered around alone on the cool, faintly sucking sand. A kind of certainty had fallen over her that this day was to be her last in 1873. She could no longer doubt the gift, and Granny had told Beatie that this day Judah would know whom he loved. She did not know how this would come about, but she knew that it would. "And it won't be me," she thought. Her pail full now, she put it in the shade of a tree, and wandered by herself amongst the rocks, shoally falls from the cliff. The crevices filled with driftwood, empty crab shells, dead and dry starfish and sea eggs. In the heat there was uncanny silence, as though the sea itself was too exhausted to sigh or murmur, and in this silence she heard the sounds of farewell. She sat amongst the fallen cities of the rocks and watched Judah and Beatie, high on the beach, lighting a campfire. Beatie filled a billy can at the spring sea cage on the cliff, and once or twice Judah went out and towed the now afloat dory near the shore. The tide was rising fast, with a long whispering, Ah. The billy must have boiled, for Beattie came running to get her. The little girl's face, though she wore a cabbage tree hat, as did Abigail and Judah, was scorched with sunburn. "You've been doing it again," she accused. "Doing what?" "Staring at him. I seen you, sitting on the rocks like a mermaid, staring and gawking." Abigail said nothing, but scowled at her and stalked her head along the beach. A big old red gun, almost one of the sandstone rocks, sheltered them as they ate. Hats pulled over their eyes to keep out the sea dazzle. Judah talked idly of his work. "10 bob a month and found, but 'twill be grand pay when I'm an AB." Abigail translated this into dollars, couldn't believe the answer, and then remembered that loaves were a penny each and that Granny often bought a whole fresh fish for 2 pence. She marked that being a boy on a coaster seemed to equate with being a man for a boy's pay and status. Judah laughed. "Well, a boy's a boy, no doubt of that, and he's kept in his place. Me now, when I started nigh 4 years ago, I brought the food along from the galley, and by jings, I waited till the men had taken their share before I ventured to help myself. Swept the forecastle, took the dishes back to the galley, learnt to know my place right smart after a thick ear or two from one of the crew." It seemed to Abigail that it would be a hard life, even for a hefty 14-year-old as Judah must have been. A boy worked cargo like the rest of the crew, always went aloft to furl the higher sail, and never ventured to offer an opinion during forecastle talk. On the other hand, he was expected to smoke a pipe or chew tobacco. "Yuck," said Abigail. "And sink your quota of rum when you're ashore with the men," added Judah. "But Granny, wouldn't a she skin me alive if she caught me at it, and any old road, I've no taste for either. And I promised Mother besides, so that clinches it." He yawned. "Come on, lassies, let's I'll show you a pretty place or two, Abby, if you fancy." But Beattie wanted to climb the rocks and scramble out onto a little peninsula of grass and pink pig face to be king of the castle, as she said. "You'll do as I say. Time to move," he said, stamping out the fire and gathering up their belongings to put in the basket. "I want to stay here and paddle," said Beattie, "and I'm sick of the boat, up and down, and nothing to see but water and places with no people in them. I want to play Robinson Crusoe." "I don't mind staying a while longer," began Abigail, but Beattie turned on her roughly. "Your opinion in it asked. On this voyage, you're only the boy." Abigail laughed, but Judah took hold of Beattie, gave her a little shake, and said sternly, "What's up with you today, you wee smatchet? You've been gurning and groaning pretty near since we left home. Are you ailing?" "I just want to play Robinson Crusoe," muttered Beattie. Suddenly, she aimed to kick at Judah's bare skin. "Right, that does it," said her brother. "You've a temper like a ferret today, and I'll stand no more of it. Stay here and play Robinson Crusoe while I take Abby for a little row. Get in the dory, Abby." He put a wet sack over the cockles and cautioned Beattie. "Now, see the sun don't get on them, or they'll all die afore we get them home to Granny. Or do you wish to change your mind and come with us?" Beattie glowered at him, and he said, "Stay here then, you self-willed brat. Dovey's too soft to you, and Gibby both. We're off, how do you like that?" "I don't care a blanky damn," screamed Beattie, wading out a little way into the water and shaking her fist at them. "I hope the boat sinks." "No, you don't," yelled back Judah, laughing. "You play Robinson Crusoe there for a while I show Abby the harbour. We'll be back before Man Friday comes to eat you up." Beattie sat down at the water's edge, her arms around her knees, scowling. "If she could hurl thunder and lightning, she would," Judah laughed. "Rest easy, Abby. She'll be as sweet as pie when we come back to get her." The dory skidded softly over the water that was coloured like a glass marble, here a clear streak and a sun-speckled sandbar plain to be seen, there dark blue like polished stone. "Perhaps we shouldn't have left her," began Abigail, but Judah shushed her. He pulled out into the stream and around the edge of the little peninsula that Beattie had wanted to climb. Waterbirds of all kinds flew up from the brown-pocked terraces sluiced with translucent water. A glistening native bee landed on Judah's hand, and Abigail leant forward to brush it off. No, she'll go in the water. She hasn't a sting, so don't fret." He went on rowing, and in a moment the bee arrowed back to the shore. "I have a great liking for this land," he said. "Man hasn't spoiled it yet, not even with steam factories and all the dirt the rich make around them." He shipped the oars and sat looking about. Abigail peeped from under the brim of her hat at his brown face shining with sweat, his strong calves and calloused feet. As she peeped, thinking herself unobserved in the shadow of the hat, he reached out and playfully caught her foot with his prehensile toes. She jumped and blushed. "What's the matter, Abby? For you seem sad today." I think, she swallowed. Surely she wasn't going to cry. She looked away. "I think this is my last day." "Did Granny say so?" "No." "Well then?" Abigail managed to smile. "I have gifts of my own, you know." "Ah, Abby, love, don't go. Not to that grievous world you've described. Stay here with us." His arms were around her. His hat fell off into the water and floated away. His cheek rubbed against hers, and she put up her hand and stroked his face. Why, Abby, dinna weep. You must not. What's there to weep about on this bright day? But she couldn't stop. A huge, shameful, gulping hiccup came out of her. Judah grinned. Don't laugh at me, damn you, cried Abigail. Why, Abby, he said, as though astonished. My little one, my Abby. Now, although Abigail had no regular boy friend, she had had her share of kisses, everything from the sudden whack on the lips of what appeared to be a hot muffin to the lingering pressure of a hairy sardine. She had been half devoured by someone who had been watching too many Italian films, but when her nose got into the act as well, she had stamped on the kisser's foot and alienated him forever. She had had ear biters and eyebrow lickers, and she cared for none of them. But this is quite different. Her body went off on its own, yielded and clung and moulded itself to Judah's. Her head whirled, and so exquisite a melting sensation arose in her middle she thought she was going to die. She could have stayed there under his kiss forever, but it was he who drew away, breathing quickly. His face was red, his eyes downcast, and he seemed not to want to look at her. Oh, Abby, he said hoarsely, it were wrong for me to kiss you in such a way. He stopped and said with difficulty, For a little while I didn't know what I felt. Here you're but a bairn, yet I thought for a moment you were a woman grown. And you were a woman grown. He gazed at her helplessly. It were wrong of me, and yet I cannot feel regret. She whispered, I love you, Judah. He gazed at her, silent and perturbed, and she saw in his candid eyes that he had no answer. She remembered then what Mrs. Talisker had said, that if one loved truly, one could exist without the loved one. Her whole body cried out for the few frail blisses she had known, to be able to look at him, listen to him, be kissed as if she were a woman and not a child. And she thought in anguish, if I were older, I'd know what to say, but I don't. She could only say what was in her heart. Don't worry, Judah. I know about Dovey. What I feel about you, well, that's my worry, not yours. He took her hand and held it between his two large ones. But it is my worry, Abby, because now I'm in a swiver. I don't know what I feel. From the little peninsula off which the dory was drifting and circling came a sound like an enraged sea-hawk. Abigail jumped, frightened and dislocated. "'Tis Beatie," she seen. Beatie was up on the tumbled rocks. Her small figure seemed to be doing a war dance. She picked up a stone and threw it with all her might. It fell far short of the boat, but Judah looked disturbed. He took up the oars. "She wouldn't tell poor Dovey, surely," he muttered. "The dear knows I don't want to distress poor little Dovey." They were silent until they pulled into the beach. The tide was now half full, clear green water sliding into the foot of the red gum, where Beatie stood waiting with the 3 pails of cockles. Judah threw out the anchor and jumped ashore. "You!" said Beatie in a voice shrill with rage. "I saw!" "Keep it to yourself, then," he said shortly, "for I don't want Dovey upset. Take one of the pails to the boat, there's a good lass." "Take it yourself," spat Beatie. "Right, I will," he said. He took all 3 pails, heaved them into the boat, and said to Abigail, "Move up while I get this wildcat aboard." He held out his hand to help Beatie. She flew at him, punched him in the chest, hammered on the arm with which he held her off. Half angry, half laughing, he said, "Will you stop it, you wee devil? Stop it! I'll punch you yeller and green," screeched Beatie. "To do such a thing to Dovey, who trusts you like she trusts God himself?" He picked her up by the back of the dress, held her kicking and flailing like a maddened cat, and said, "You've got it wrong, Beatie. There's naught between Abby and me, and Abby will tell you so." He put her into the boat. The child subsided into wild sobs. Abby ventured to put a hand on her shoulder, but Beatie flung it off. "You're a bad girl. We should have left you in the Suez Canal. It would have suited you grand." Judah shipped the oars, leaned forward, and shook Beatie violently. "Don't you speak that way of Abby when you know nothing of what passed between us, for you're wrong. I'm telling you true, hen." Beatie was pale. "That you could be such a Judas, my own brother. Dovey, expecting to be wed by January, with her bride chest full and her ring chosen, and the down payment made. Don't speak to me, either of you. I'm fair sick to the belly with disgust."